Welcome to the character creation video for Unity. My name is Anson, I'm the creator of Unity, and I'll be walking you through the steps for creating a sample character. Before I dive into the individual steps for creating a character, I wanted to take a moment to explain my design vision for character creation. For me, characters have always been the most critical part of role-playing games. While some characters are fairly straightforward, once in a while a player will come up with an amazing concept that builds into a deep and textured character, adding tons of flavor to the game. My goal with the mechanics I'm about to explain is to encourage players to create characters with depth that organically grow as the story progresses. Not only do I want to promote the creation of these interesting characters, but I also want to facilitate the sharing and telling of these characters' stories. For the purposes of this video, we'll be examining a sample character created by one of my players. We'll just call my player Sarah for now. So, starting from the top, the Session 0. The Session 0 is a critical part of Unity. Because Unity has been built with a lot of tuning knobs and modular components, it's important to spend a little bit of time to discuss as a group the type of game you'd all like to play. For example, if your group decides they want a harsher, grittier, and more survival-oriented campaign, that could in turn affect the choices you make when creating your character. Now we need to decide on a race and sex for our character. There are 4 distinct player races to choose from: the graceful Vala, the mighty Furians, the tenacious humans, and the brilliant afflicted. Sarah chose to create a Furian female. Also, now that we know our race and sex, we can pick out a name for our character. In Sarah's case, she chose to call her Furian Cora Redhand. The next step is a big one. We now choose our class. Our class is hugely important to how our character plays. It largely defines their role in combat and also influences a bit of how the character approaches situations outside of combat. There are a total of 9 classes to choose from, each being thematically distinct from each other. Sarah chose to make Cora a judge. The judge class fulfills that traditional fantasy archetype of the holy martial warrior, or paladin. But this being Unity and a brand new unique world, judges have a bit of a spin on them. They are judge, jury, and executioner. They are the law. Now that we have our class and race, we can begin to distribute our main attributes. Attributes are probably the most significant stat for the characters we create. They affect everything we do in Unity. The 4 attributes are might, agility, mind, and presence. Only after we know the demands of our class and the baseline stats of our race can we begin to determine the distribution of our attributes. The default method is to use an array. Every character at level 1 starts with an array of. You are then required to distribute these modifiers to the baseline attributes of your character. In Sarah's case, Furians start with. You now take your array and may distribute each of your array modifiers to your baseline attributes, but on a 1-to-1 basis. Sarah chose to beef up Cora's might to +3, reduce her agility to 0, increase her mind by +1, and keep her presence at its default value. The alternative method to generating stats is to roll for them. Rules for this method are included in the core rulebook. Now we get to my favorite part, the core paths. A lot of traditional role-playing games present you with large lists of discrete skills. I've always felt that was a bit too mechanical and didn't provide a lot of opportunities to deepen your character and tell some stories. In Unity, you're encouraged to create core paths. Core paths define your character and help you align that vision that you had of your character to what they're actually capable of in-game. Think of core paths as fragments of a character's history, of their backstory. A person's life is a tapestry of shared experiences. Core paths bundle these experiences. Imagine your character's life as a large pie. Each core path is a slice of that life pie. The numerical value assigned to the core path determines how big or small that slice is. To better understand this concept, let's take a look at our sample character, Cora Redhand, and see how her core paths give depth and texture to the character, while remaining congruent to Sarah's vision that she had for her. So when Sarah created Cora, she didn't have a very in-depth backstory in mind quite yet. Instead, she knew that she wanted Cora to be physically dominant or athletic. She wanted her to have a close relationship with her father and some tragedy surrounding that. She thought, that I as a GM could integrate that into the campaign and use as a plot hook. And she also came up with a reason as to why Cora became a judge. In her mind, when she pictured Cora, she pictured a rough and tumble tomboy with a soft spot and complicated relationship with her father. She also saw Cora as a tenacious survivor. So let's look at her core paths individually to see how she brought all of this together. At level 1, players have 5 points to distribute among 3 core paths with some rules to guide the distribution. Cora's most prominent core path is a warrior's heart. This could also be seen as the biggest slice of her life pie. As Sarah tried to describe what she was accomplishing with a warrior's heart, I asked her to think of a short blurb that distills the image she has in her head of Cora, that represents her physical prowess or natural athleticism. I told her to make it a story, a piece of history that gives color to Cora's life. We ended up with this. So what does this mean for Cora in-game? When Cora stumbles upon a task that requires athleticism such as swimming against a strong current, clearing a chasm with a jump, or holding her breath, she can call upon her core path and add the bonus that she assigned it to her role. While those examples are fairly straightforward, here's an example of where core paths really begin to shine with regards to character development and engagement at the table. So during one of our games, Cora and company ended up in a tavern, embroiled in a deadly drinking game with a local strongman. One by one, the party dropped like flies or began vomiting everywhere to their embarrassment. Cora was the last member, and she was damned if she let that big oaf across the table from her win. When Sarah went to roll to outdrink her opponent, she told me that she would like to use Cora's Warrior's Heart core path as a bonus, and she was going to tell me a story of why some of that path should apply to this role. So Sarah puts down her dice and begins to paint a picture of a younger teenage Cora. It's nighttime, after sparring practice, and Cora's sneaking around trying to see what her older brothers are up to. She remembers secretly following her brothers down into the dark cellar of their home. She remembers lying on the cool stone floor, hidden behind some sacks of grain, as her brothers begin to jostle and laugh heartily as they reveal bottles of Firian fire wine from underneath their clothes. She watches them taking swigs and slowly stumbling around as the night goes on, always wanting to be one of the boys and never wanting to be left out of anything her older brothers did. She revealed herself and with a devilish smirk told them, "I'm going to tell father and mother if you don't let me try." She quickly found out what a complete lightweight she was, but after several weeks of stowing away with her brothers to play these drinking games, she had developed quite a tolerance and also earned the respect of her siblings. Something magical happened as Sarah told her story, as she brought this core path to life. The table fell silent. All the other players, myself included, leaned in a little bit closer. Our eyes grew a little bit wider. We waited eagerly for Sarah to finish her story while hanging on to every word. She painted a wonderful picture. She drew us in and made us care a little bit more for Cora. She made Cora a little bit more real. It led to more questions. Where were her brothers now? It was only later on, as she had to call upon her core paths for future tasks, do we learn that she watched her brothers get slaughtered before her eyes by a demonic attack on her home. This made her previous story all the more poignant and heartfelt. It was such a powerful moment that I granted her the full bonus of her +3 for this task. Of course, as a GM, you can decide to give a portion of the core path. You don't always have to give the full thing, especially if it's a bit of a tangent from the theme of that path. But what's important is the development of the character and the immersive experience of storytelling granted to the table. Some of you listening to this might think, that can leave a lot of room for creative exploitation, and I totally hear you. It was a huge fear for me in implementing something like this, but it was a fear that was largely unfounded in actual practice. If you're playing with a group of friends, which is probably more often than not, you're usually all there to have a good time, to go on some epic adventures, and tell some interesting stories. With the freedom afforded by tabletop role-playing, there's an unspoken agreement not to twist the rules or abuse this freedom too much. I've also found that when given the opportunity to grow and develop their characters, players begin to really care for them and become attached to them. So much that creating some far-fetched story to achieve a minor mechanical bonus just isn't worth the incongruency thrusted upon their character concept. But of course, this will be something that you'll have to gauge for your own group. I provide alternative rules for a more regimented approach to skills in Unity. There are pre-generated core paths included in the rulebook with more rigidly defined parameters. This could be useful if you're running a game at a con or with a brand new group of people, or you really just can't stand that one munchkin in your group. With that being said though, I definitely urge you to try the default approach of creating your own core paths. You'll be really surprised at where it can take you and the rest of the table emotionally. Let's move along to the other core paths. Next up is Daughter of a Scholar. While Sarah wanted Cora to possess some physicality to her, she also didn't want to play a big, dumb, and strong stereotype. She illustrates Cora's diversity and intellect by painting a bit of a story with this core path's blurb. When it comes to tasks that might require some knowledge of history or maybe a language or culture, Cora can invoke this core path for the minor bonus of +1. But again, remember that you can launch into some strong character developing stories to elevate the experience at the table for everyone and also net yourself a nice bonus. An example of this core path deepening Cora's character is when Sarah uses core path to gain a small bonus to her performing a song to calm a child that was dying in her arms. The story behind Cora being able to sing such a beautiful melody was because of the lullaby her father would sing to her before bed as she finished her readings for the night. Such a story is congruent with the core path and gets everyone to invest emotionally a little bit more into the character, which is one of the goals behind Unity. Cora's last core path is Lone Survivor. Sarah had to come up with a reason for why Cora became a judge, and she saw in her mind a young Firian girl lost in the wilderness, but guided by a greater power, a power that would keep her warm and fed and eventually lead her to a greater purpose. To represent the skills she acquired living in the wilderness for months alone, Sarah developed this core path. So when it comes to tracking, foraging for food, building a shelter, etc., Cora can invoke this core path for a bonus. And this concludes the core path step for character creation, and it will probably be the area you will spend the most time on, but trust me when I say it'll be worth it to get this right. Next up, we take a look at our class feature and record it onto our character sheet. Most classes have class features that are simply baseline, but some classes will need to make choices on their features. An example is a priest. A priest can walk two paths. One is a spell-slinging chaplain, or the other who prefers to preach with his mace crashing down on your face, also known as a war priest. They will be granted different class features, so be sure to examine this area of character creation closely if your class provides choices. The judge's class feature is called Zeal. This is definitely a nice bonus for the judge who doesn't have that raw damage potential of their more secular counterpart, the Dreadnought. Now we need to choose a class perk. At level 1 you usually have a choice between two perks. Cora chose Voice of the Emperor. It's quite a potent one, but that's reflected in its expensive cost. Perks add flavor and reinforce the fantasy of the class, so take a moment to pause the video and read about it. Now we need to choose our powers. Each class comes with multiple tiers of powers. At level 1, we only have access to tier 1 baseline powers, and we can choose 3 of those powers. As your character grows, there's a ton of variations and different builds you can discover. Even an entire party of the same class can each be very distinct from each other and play completely differently. This is a very exciting part of Unity's design, so take a look at the free sampler, the link is on the website, for some power combo examples to help you better understand Unity's combat system. For the sake of time, you can pause the video here and take a moment to read what each power does that Sarah had chosen for Cora. She envisioned Cora as a tanky warrior who, while isn't solely focused on defense, can take quite a beating and distract the enemies for her squishier teammates. She took Radiant Strike and Righteous Defense to further exemplify this role that she wants to play. Speed of Light was chosen for Cora to have her moment in the spotlight, and also because Sarah just loved the evocative nature of the power itself. The last step is to select equipment for your character. There will be tables of items to choose from in the core rulebook. Be sure to look at your class's restrictions to see what they're able to wield and wear before you select your equipment. The most important pieces of this process are picking your weapons and armor. In Cora's case, she chose a heavy two-handed weapon and a set of heavy armor. This concludes our character generation sample video. I hope you found it informative and that it gives you a bit of insight into the type of game Unity strives to be. For more information, be sure to check out the main website, which can be found in the description below.